Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship. I'm your host, coach and journalist Becky Mollenkamp. Feminist Founders is a listener-funded podcast. Your contributions enable me to continue bringing you these important conversations without corporate advertising. To support the mission, head to feministfounderspodcast.com and sign up for a paid subscription. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to today's show. For the last couple of years, I've been incredibly intentional about creating and calling in community of values-aligned folks, which has meant a lot of networking inside of girl bossy spaces where they are not all values-aligned, but finding those one or two people in the room who really are values-aligned. And I'm really pleased to say that today you're meeting one of those people that I met along that path, Babs Cheung. I was so excited when I first met her inside of another community that I was in because she was talking about astrology in a way that I hadn't heard before. I've never been a big astrology person, and I will say I first sort of dismissed her like, oh, there's the astrology person. But it did not take long for me to realize that she was not what I had assumed. Babs is an astrologer, yes, and a feminist thought leader. She's talking about how we bridge that gap or how we unite feminism and astrology in ways that have really been amazing in my own life. And I'm excited for you to learn a little bit about what she's doing. We talk about the book she has coming out, hopefully in about a year, as well as in our bonus content, which you can subscribe to Feminist Founders newsletter to get that this week. We talk about Mercury retrograde, which is something that always comes up for business owners. I hear it all the time. I'm sure you have too. This conversation's fantastic. Babs is fantastic. And I'm really excited that I met her on my path and that you now get to hear from her wisdom. Hi, Babs. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well.
I'm so excited to chat with you. We just admitted before we started recording, we're both a little rundown, not as peppy as we would like to be. We didn't get as much sleep as we would like, but I have a feeling we'll pull this out and it'll be great.
Yeah, it'll be great. It'll be really candid because it'll be our thoughts without rest.
Exactly, which could be good or bad. Well, I'm going to start this the way I always do, which is having you tell us about your relationship with feminism.
We are in a long-term committed relationship. We started like all the way back as like childhood sweethearts, and then here we are battling it out, taking on the world and patriarchy. And that is honestly, I think, my deepest and most loving relationship of all the things. I think it's me and feminism. We go really hard. Far, far back.
What a lovely love note to feminism. That's so nice. Have there been any complicated moments, or has it always been really easy and clear for you what your feminism looks like?
No, it's so complicated. So complicated. I think it got complicated as I grew up and had to face the world that didn't necessarily welcome feminism. So it was incredibly polarizing, especially now. I think it's the most politically charged it's ever been. And I thought that like 2016 was politically charged, and no, this is the one. And was it 2016? When was Trump? Yeah, it was. Okay. I don't know. With the pandemic and like time jumping, I don't even know anymore. But yeah. Okay.
What is time?
Yeah, right. What is time, truly? So I would say that like I thought it was bad back then, and then now it's just like everything is worse. But at the same time, like there's so many. I mean, I was just talking about this yesterday with a friend about the Barbie movie, which happened just last year. And like, we were talking about how the Barbie movie was very like feminist light. So it was like a nice intro to feminism. Whereas like all the people that I know who have been with feminism since, way back, they're kind of like, this is not made for me. Like, this is clearly not, like up level enough, right? Let's say. And so I kind of like have come to grips with the fact that, oh yeah, people are still discovering what feminism is. And like, we need to make space for that because, the more people we have, the better we off at ending patriarchy.
Yeah, I have wrestled with that since the movie, seeing the movie. My initial reaction was like, ho hum, kind of annoyed. Like, why are we all rah-rah about this when it's like just so feminism 101 at best? And like, it's my feminism of 20 years ago, blah, blah, blah. But then I've come around a lot more, I think, where you are, of like, we need entry points for everyone. And it's awfully elitist and
probably a bit privileged and supremacist even of me to be like, ho hum, I want more people at the table. And if that's the thing that gets some young girl or even some older woman to say, whoa, I never thought of it that way, then yay, because we need more of us at the table. Okay, well, speaking of feminism, your Instagram bio says that you're an astrologer on a mission to take down patriarchy.
Yep.
Which I don't know that most people, at least I'll just say for myself, I don't think I ever necessarily thought of astrology and patriarchy in the same sentence. I will be honest that I've always thought of astrology as more like a fun thing and like a women's magazine thing. And you were the person really who opened my eyes to a whole new world. Oh, I feel like I'm going to start singing A Whole New World with astrology. And, you know, it's interesting because my own journey with feminism has been definitely more of this like elitist intellectual place with it. And I have been softening my edges in the last few years. My vision of feminism, this like elitist sort of intellectual, whatever approach to it was actually pretty patriarchal in a lot of ways, right? And so these like tarot and astrology and sort of these divine feminine concepts have always been to me like something I called woo-woo, and it was not for me. And it's like, I know that I always kind of look my nose down on it. And you've helped me sort of see that, oh no, this shit really is feminist and is important. So tell us how is astrology feminist?
I will say that for me, at least, like to go back to my relationship with feminism, it starts with a question. And I always questioned why things were the way that they were. And my feminist roots and my astrological roots come from the same place. So I was, you know, I always like to joke and say that like the quickest way to make a witch is to raise her Catholic because I was raised Catholic. And because I was sent to Sunday school and I was, you know, in the weeds of the Bible, I would just constantly ask, like, why is it that there's only 2 roles for women? Like, and it's the extremes. It's like the immaculate virgin who gets pregnant and then it's the whore. And there's no in between. There might be the one lady with like the washing of the feet, but then like everyone kind of jumps on the bandwagon anyway. And so like that's the thing, maybe 2.5 roles for women. And it's like, that's it. Like it's just a book about men. 4 men wrote this book and it's all about men. Oh, no wonder, you know? And so feminism and astrology are really keyed in together because it wasn't only my own form of rebellion against a patriarchy, which is the Catholic Church in this way, but when I had gone into the history of astrology and I learned that theologians were supported by the Catholic Church to learn astrology, I was like, wait, this was a boys' club? This at first was a boys' club? Oh, wait, that makes sense because who got to read? White men, let's say, just to sum it all up, right? So it's like, well, women weren't reading it. Marginalized people weren't reading it. You know, we weren't learning astrology. It was the educated class and specifically men that had the privilege to learn astrology. And yet somehow fast forward all these years and now it's only in women's magazines. There was a weird disconnection there. And so to me, I always felt that astrology became weaponized over time because of, you know, its patriarchy being in bed with capitalism. And then capitalism being like, hey, we can make money off of people's insecurities, women's insecurities. And astrology is a fun way to do that. Let's do that.
Right. We can create their insecurities.
Yes.
And then profit off of those insecurities.
Exactly.
Like, and that nothing has changed about that over hundreds of years at this point, I think.
Exactly. But astrology happens to be a really great vehicle because it's so cute and like it's like there's a lot of merchandise that can go along with it. And like there's nothing wrong with like representing, you know, that you're a Scorpio. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that capitalism can use that against you, can use your own desire to identify against you, which is really the world we live in, and it's broken and it sucks. What else is new?
Right. Well, I'm interested, and I think other people might be, like when you hear about being raised Catholic, how you find your, and I think you were raised Catholic and probably sounds like in a similar vein to me of like astrology was kind of this fun, cute thing that you sometimes saw in magazines you were reading or online when you were searching, or people, you know, had their little Scorpio tattoo or whatever. And it was like fun. How do you go from that to dedicating your life to astrology? Because I read up on you, obviously, and also I know you. And I know you have a bachelor's degree in philosophy and philosophy and astrology. I'm very curious about the links there or if that played any role. But I also know, of course, like anybody with a degree in philosophy, what do you do with that after you graduate college? You go and do other random things, right? Because there's not a lot of philosophy jobs out there. And so I think you were doing like event production in New York City, and then the pandemic came along and that really messed things up. And then I read something about, and I want you to tell me more about this, that you did a spreadsheet activity. That was what pointed you to astrology. So maybe you can tell me like that little journey of how you went from Catholicism to studying philosophy to doing event production to like ending up in this spreadsheet activity, and then we'll go from there. But like, I just want to know that kind of the Cliff's Notes version of that journey of what got you from there to A to B.
The pipeline. Yeah, very unconventional. I love it. Thank you for doing the research. I appreciate it. I'm very flattered. So I actually was raised in a scientific home. So all of my family is STEM, engineering, mathematics. My mother's a mathematician. My father's an astrophysicist. My brother is like three things combined, all in STEM. And so it was very much expected of me to do STEM as well, because, you know, the genetics, the immigrant story, you know, it's all built in there. And so I was sent to school, and I didn't want to go because I was of the variety of wanting to take a gap year to learn about myself before I spend a bunch of money to do what I'm supposed to do, right? Of course, that was taboo and not something that I was allowed to do. So I went to school reluctantly, thankfully on a scholarship. And I was basically on the fast track to becoming a botanist, actually, at the very first of it. Because that was the only thing I could be okay with. Like, okay, flowers, they're beautiful. Poison, cool, maybe. I don't know, something. And so I did 3 years of basically biochem to like gear myself up to become a botanist. But in my third year, my junior year, at the end of that year, I had a breakdown. I live in New York, so a really great way to illustrate like my breakdown was that I had a 2-hour commute back and forth because it was a commuter school, and I had fallen asleep on the train. Thank God nothing happened to me, but I was on the train for 6 hours. So the train went all the way back to my home stop, and then went all the way back to Brooklyn, all the way to the very end. And by the time I woke up, I was in Midtown, and, you know, 6 hours had passed. So, and it was heading back to Brooklyn. And so I thought, this is not right. This is like not worth it. I'm going to just quit and deal with the consequences later. And so that very next day, I quit all my classes. I made a lot of enemies because my school is very small and the biochem department was incredibly small. So everyone had to do independent study because the classes messed up. And that same day, I decided to do philosophy because it was the credits. I had the most credits because of electives, and I just needed to graduate on time. So that was what it was. But then I ended up becoming really good at philosophy, and then I made more enemies. It's like the story of my life. This is what it's like to be a feminist, by the way. You just make enemies wherever you go, and then you find the people that adore you, and then you're like, good. So if you're feeling that way, you're on the right path.
That's good, because I've been feeling that a lot lately,
right.
So I appreciate the reassurance.
Right? And so I made a lot more enemies because I ended up becoming the best in philosophy, and I took all the awards from the people who worked 4 years to get to that. And then out of nowhere, this like outlier comes in and swoops in everything. People always ask me, what are you going to do with a philosophy degree? And I told them, I'm going to learn to be poor. That way, as soon as I make money, even a little bit of money, I'll be fine. Like, it's about resourcefulness, right? And so eventually I went on to fashion and personal styling, and then I came up with this idea, or it was given to me, however way I reframe it, where I would dress up my clients like really beautifully, and they would always respond with, Babs, where am I going to wear this to? And my response immediately back was, when you're out hanging with me, and so I called it a Babs Night Out, and that was my production company for events. And so I had like all these different secret speakeasy type events all over New York for like powerful, empowered women. That also looks really good, you know, purchased from me, of course, like from the store that I worked out of. And I had like a really great time just, you know, connecting with community. but also empowering all these women because again, like we have all these amazing outfits, right? But like we have no places to wear them. And I think that's very sad in our culture. And then, yeah, so the pandemic then began, that shut everything down. I wasn't willing to go to jail for that. So I was meditating, and what came to me was a spreadsheet. The universe and I have a very solid, fluid communication. So the universe said to me, I need you to do a spreadsheet, like kind of like an event spreadsheet that you would do, but you're going to have these 3 columns. The first column is going to be, what is it that you're good at? And this was like in terms of like, how am I going to pay my bills? Right. So the first column is, what are you good at? The second column is, what do you love to do so that you don't burn out? And then the third one is, what is it that you're willing to do for free? And I was like, why the hell would I do anything for free? I got bills to pay. It's, it's pandemic times. Like, what are you talking about? And the response I got was just laughter. And it was like, if you think you're going to make any money in your first like 3 years of business, you're hilarious. And I was like, oh, we're doing a business. So, so then, I enjoy teaching, talking, educating, rallying, screaming, writing. And astrology actually was like the umbrella to combine all the things that I love to do, that I'm good at, and that I'm willing to do for free. So this is how I've created an incredibly sustaining model. And now I'm in my 4th year and, by that formula, making money. So that's good.
That is good. Well, and that's, I think, something a lot of people don't think about with businesses is everyone, and I think it's this online business space and
totally,
and the bros who've made everyone think that they should be millionaires in a year. And it's just silly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not how the reality of business works. Can that happen to some random person? Yeah. But that is not what happens to most businesses. And I think that's why so many businesses fail. They go into business expecting that, not realizing that for many businesses, it takes 3 to 5 years to become profitable. And they're not ready for that. So then they fold. And that's why so many businesses fold in those first 3 years.
Yes.
Aside.
Exactly.
Okay. But
anyway, so that was the pipeline.
No, that's okay, because we're going to get more to business. But I want to know more about astrology specifically, because, as a person who's very heady and who comes to things through like probably similar to you, although different, but like this real emphasis on education in my life as a child and throughout my life. My parents, I was very lucky in that I don't know if it's lucky, but I had 2 parents who both had advanced college degrees, which is certainly for the age that I was in, for my mom to have that. And then also my dad, like that was not as common. Because of that, education was definitely emphasized. And I, through all of that, like developed this idea that you have to have a degree in order to be able to say, I'm good at this thing. This is something I've had to move past because I have these 2 degrees in journalism. And yet, I mean, I'm still using them in some ways.
Yes,
like
you
this.
are.
But, I'm moving into coaching was hard because it was like, oh, I don't have a degree in that. I don't have the credentials. I don't have those bona fides to say I can prove, right, quote unquote, that I can do this thing. Well, astrology is not the kind of field that you go and get a degree in, as far as I know. I don't even know that there are astrology degrees. And so how did you even come to that? It wasn't like you had a degree in it. I don't know that had you done years of study or anything? Like, how did you come to the place of saying, oh, astrology, when that is not something that was even really strongly in your background? And then because you didn't have that degree and all of that, and you have some of that similar background that I do around education, how did you develop the internal confidence to say, and by the way, I now don't believe that you need this degree. So I just want to be clear. But how did you develop that internal confidence? Because this is something that happens with women so often. They hold themselves back from something because they don't have that third party, that outside source, that college, that university, that credentialing thing saying you're qualified, you're allowed to do this. So how did you get to that place?
Oh, that's such a good question. I've never been asked this before, so I love it. It's very new. So to clarify, there are definitely schools out there that will give you a certificate in astrology.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
And there's a lot of global schools who do so too. So they do very advanced, vigorous, specified niches in astrology. And much respect to them. However, for me, I'm self-study. If people saw my chart, they'd understand why. It's just much easier for me. I definitely just learn from all different resources, but the best is auditory, because I like to be able to listen at 2 times the speed. And I feel that during a live lecture, I can't do that. So then I just zone out, and then it's a whole thing. So I personally just know my strengths and stick to them. But I mean, I studied, and I mean study, I read astrology books as a kid, basically. So like I'm 11 and I'm like obsessed. My gateway was like learning about my Scorpio moon, because I had noticed that like all the other kids weren't like bogged down by like the depths of emotion at such a young age, but I always was. And I thought there was something wrong with me. But then I discovered that Scorpio moon placement, and I was like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I just haven't found the people that also resonate with this energy signature. And so in order to learn more about astrology, the best way is to learn about yourself, because you are the living embodiment of this chart. And so all the experiences that I have, it helps to inform how it might translate into a chart or how it expresses itself. And so I think to answer your question, though, I'm like, what was the point in which I felt confident enough to go out and do this for business? It was actually, so in 2020, after I did the spreadsheet and I decided, okay, I need to be an astrologer. Before that, I had a bunch of business-ish training because I had that original event planning business. It was never like finalized to the point where I got an LLC for it, but it was like enough that I was doing contract work, basically. And so to me, I always knew that branding was the strongest toolkit for any business. And so I wanted to get very clear on branding first before I even launched it or got an LLC or got anything legitimized, because I needed to understand brand identity first as a way to present to the public in a way that the market was missing. And so it came with a lot of market research. I learned that a lot of astrologers that are out doing business right now, for whatever reason, don't charge a premium, which I think subtracts from other people like myself who are just like, why are you charging it for like $11? Like, expect more for yourself, you know? But there are people who are like that, who are, you know, going through their pricing modules and trying to figure out what's best for them, models rather. And so like, to go back to it, like, I just did a lot of market research. I needed to know what the gaps were in the market and how I could fill it. And the number one thing that I found was that everyone is focused on love readings or career readings or something of that nature, but no one was talking about what the fuck was going on. And so as soon as and again, it comes back to the questions. I ask a question and everything unfolds. And so I created, my very first reading was called WTFIGO, which stands for what the fuck is going on? Because that's honestly all we want to know whenever we go to a psychic, whenever we go to an astrologer, whenever we go to these spiritual practices. We want to know what the fuck is going on so that we can address the situation, put a handle on it, and at least like control our reaction to it, because we can't control life, but we can control our reactions. And so I beta tested that for a year. So I did donation based, and I just asked all friends and family, are you willing to, you know, have me read your chart? I just need to see as many charts as possible. And then from there, it was actually like my friends and family that were able to be like, oh, you know, here's $50, here's this. And then it was one person, one of my greatest friends, she said to me, oh no, like you should be charging like $200 and then $300 and then $400. And it was like, she was the one that was like, oh no, like you actually helped me tremendously. And in a very short amount of time, which is something that should be priced at a premium. And so I think that that's mostly what had happened. I just, at some point, all it took was for one person to be like, I'm willing to pay you this amount when you were charging this amount, which was like 400% more, you know. And so that external validation piece is still there technically, but at the same time, it's like a client reflecting to you that you're doing a great job and that you're on the right path, as opposed to an institution telling you, thank you so much for paying me $70,000. Here's your debt and a piece of paper that says that you did something. Maybe.
Were you doing readings before that spreadsheet?
No.
Oh, wow. So it was all new. This is,
Yeah.
I mean, it was something you had an interest in, but you hadn't
Yeah.
actively been doing.
Yeah, like
So fascinating.
I was good at it. Like in college, I like printed out everybody's birth charts, and I didn't know how to read it like so fluidly as I do now, because it's a language that I had to build up. But I introduced people to the concept of a birth chart. And then it wasn't until like 2020 when I had like my own IP like come out with like quarterly planning, as you know about. And 2020 was actually the best time and condition to test out that IP, because we were in such a bubble, and there's nothing going on. So like, it was just the perfect conditions for me to be like, wait, does a year really correspond to the birth chart And does it break down into quarters? And is this really the flow of things, the cosmic flow? And it turned out it was. And I had a few betas that were rolling around in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2022, 2022, I still was doing beta rounds. So 2023 was when I got my LLC. And so technically I'm in my like second official year of business, but then I've actually been in it for 4 years.
It's just something that comes up so often with my clients as a coach, working with primarily women, this like need for some outside evidence that they can do a thing, like this permission slip that they're waiting for to be qualified. And really what I think they mean is being allowed to do the thing. And what you were saying is, it's not about like some organization giving me permission, but it was about me giving myself permission after hearing from others how I was helping them. Like you can give yourself that permission. And I think that's amazing that you did that. Is that, looking at your own astrology, is that just how you're wired? Or were there other things that help you with that?
It's funny. Whenever I meet other astrologers and they look at my chart, they're like, oh, I understand why you don't go to school. It's very clear. Yeah, it's a matter of just like really knowing yourself, and that's the reason why astrology is so helpful. It's because it's if we like take away all the woo stuff away from it for a second and we just like get down to the brass tacks of why it's helpful, it does two things. One, it really teaches you about yourself and how you express. And what I mean by that is like in a given year, you're going to change. It's just the nature of how we are as the human condition. And if you don't change, then there's something wrong, right? Or generally speaking, and you're in a stagnation period. And so in which case you should look at astrology, especially to see what's happening. But as we're changing, there's certain themes that follow us around year after year. And it's really nice to be aware of that, because the more self-awareness that we build, the more that we can tackle our internalized misogyny, our external misogyny, our systems of oppression. There's all these things that kind of come to light that you can't unsee once you really understand and are like in tune with yourself and the world around you. And so that right there is just like the first pivotal reason for why astrology is fantastic and deeply feminist. The second one is that it turns into this emotional language. So I was talking about how I didn't know how to read a chart in college, but because I had to build up that emotional language. And really what it is that you're able to, when you speak the language of astrology and you find someone else that also does too, it's this amazing connecting moment that's instant. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, you love astrology? So do I. I have this, and this. And they're just like, okay, I feel it. I have this, and this. Is this why we get along? And it's instant. And it is something that I don't think really exists in other like languages. Like, yeah, it's nice to have someone who speaks Italian and you speak Italian and all that stuff, but it's really that emotional language part. It's that you truly, truly get each other because you're so into this esoteric, emotional, spiritual practice.
Well, and I see that also with people who are really into human design or Enneagram. I think it's any of these, what I think of astrology as now in a way that I didn't understand it before is it can be such a powerful tool in the same way that so many of these different tools that help us understand how we show up in the world. They, like you said, it gives you this language. And then when you meet somebody else, it helps you to be able to say, oh, I see you, which is all any of us want, right? Is to be seen. And so it allows us to say, here's this window into who I am and how I am. And for other people to say, I can see you in a way that I couldn't understand until I had some framework to put, like you said, to put some shape around it, to put words to it. And that is so beautiful. And I love anything like those tools that help you say, this is just how I am. Like, this is how I was wired. I was born this way, in the words of Lady Gaga. Like, this is how I show up. And how can that be wrong? If I was literally born this way, if this is just literally how I'm hardwired, how can that be wrong? And so then it makes you start to say, what made me think it was wrong? And I love anything that puts us on the journey of asking what made me believe that who I am is wrong. Because it takes it off of me and onto where it belongs, which is outside of us. So is that part of what you love? Like, to me, that's what makes it so feminist.
I would say so. Yeah, definitely. However, I do want to address like the devil's advocate in the room in case there is one or listening. I do not condone what I call zodiacal bigotry, which is where we decide that we don't like Scorpios, for example, because like all the Scorpios that we know hurt us.
You mean my thoughts about Tauruses? Gotcha.
Taurus. I'm a Taurus, so like that's
Except for you,
ridiculous.
obviously. I only mean male Taurus.
Yeah, male Tauruses, right? Exactly. And so like that's kind of the like I know it's like it's sensationalized and it's poppy. It's part of the pop astrology paradigm, to like rag on signs and stuff like that because it just helps because misery likes company and that's the culture that we're in right now. But I make it a huge like core tenet to my practice that like we don't bash other just because we say immature Tauruses or immature Taurus men or like unhealed Taurus men
I love
are not
unhealed.
great, so like that's what we're gonna say. We need a qualifier or else it's a very like deep descent, very fast descent into bigotry, and that's kind of what we're against here. So yeah, I just wanted to address that.
No, I think it's great because I think that the whole point of what I was saying is it is about being seen. And being seen is not being hated. It is not being prejudged, right?
Yes.
Being seen means I see how you show up and I can understand that
Exactly.
now. And if it's not providing that understanding, it's not helpful. Well, and you brought me to where I wanted to go because I know you aren't doing just these sort of basic sun sign readings, which for somebody like me who didn't know much about astrology a year ago, that was my understanding of astrology. I'm a Pisces. I read the horoscope, right? That says, here's what's going to happen in your day as a Pisces, or, here's how you are as a Pisces. And astrology is, I now know after getting my chart done with you, it's way more than just that. I know that like what we commonly see, and I guess you call it pop astrology out in those women's magazines or online or whatever, it's just that like sun sign, high level, you're a Pisces, so here's how you are sort of thing. So what is your problem or hot take or, your frustration, your opinion on pop astrology?
Yeah. I mean, I love to wax poetic about how much I have these strong mixed feelings for pop astrology. So let's start with the good. Pop astrology is great because it brings out this curiosity in people, and that is a gateway, right? That's the gateway to kind of like how the Barbie movie is the gateway to feminism. Like pop astrology is the gateway, like that Cosmo magazine that you read about how to make yourself irresistible if you're like a Pisces. That's the gateway into learning more about yourself. Okay, great, fantastic. That is what it's there for. However, if you just stop right there, if this like new baby feminists stopped at Barbie, that's not helpful.
Yeah, if you never get yourself to bell hooks and Audre Lorde, then like, what are you even doing? Yeah, you're just missing out on so much.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's like my biggest message. It's like, okay, if you love pop astrology, if you love your co-star app, if you really like to know compatibility and you really want to know like what's going on there, try to dig deeper, find a book that resonates. They have a lot of pictures now. Like there's a lot of apps out there. Like the pattern is a lot better. There's a lot of like crowdsourcing through like Reddit. Like there's many avenues that you can choose from. Now the issue with that is that there's lots of misinformation out there. So that's when eventually you're going to actually want to go to a trusted astrologer and ask them all your questions. So I will say that that's the part of it. Now, if we go into like what I really don't like about pop astrology, it truly is that most of pop astrology is sold to us in a way that's very bro-like. It uses and leverages fear and our made-up insecurities against us to always tell us that like you're on the wrong path or things aren't working out because there's something that you did wrong. Or it'll say like my favorite is like, I mean, speaking of the pattern app, like there's I remember like seeing that like, oh, there's a specific transit that a person had and they were freaking out saying that like, is my boyfriend going to dump me because of this transit? And then everyone chiming in to be like, yeah, they will. And then all the other astrologers being like, no, they won't. What are you talking about? There's no context for this. And so it's this like weird discourse that's happening that, again, a layman cannot discern who is correct or who's, because it's not super regulated. That is the downfall of not having that accreditation, right? But I would say that the hardest part for astrology is that a lot of the culture that exists, misogyny, the bro culture, capitalism, especially capitalism, is so now interwoven with astrology that the best way to sell someone to have a reading is to tell them that there's something wrong with them or their life choices. And that's not something that I don't subscribe to that at all. I like to go from I like to level with people and say, listen, life is kind of shitty right now. I get that. Let's figure out what the fuck is going on. And then we'll figure out all your different options. Because ultimately, like, my tagline should be this, but it's not. It should be like, as your supporting astrologer, because that's what I am, it's my job to just give you all your options. I don't guarantee that any of them are good, but you at least have options. And I think that that's really important because people get so debilitated in trying to act when they think they only have one way to go, when, like, no, there's many ways to go. It's just they all might be shit, but let's just choose the one that's least shitty, you know?
Kelly Deals was on season 1 of the show, and her whole thing is trying to de-bro marketing, right? As a coach, I deeply understand that there are so many coaches that are operating out of that patriarchal, capitalist, white supremacist sort of ideology or beliefs, that fundamental thing that it makes coaching something that becomes really gross, like,
Yeah.
preying on people's insecurities, practicing in ways that you shouldn't be, and like,
Yeah.
one right way of doing things. There's all this stuff that shows up. And so it's just a reminder that it's everywhere. It's in every industry,
Everywhere.
right? Yeah. And so that's that reminder that's really important to find the person that understands the bigger context, like the bigger landscape in which we live, and has that relationship with like an intersectional feminist approach that says, I get it and why that stuff's harmful, and here's how we're not going to do that here. And that sounds like what you're trying to do. And one of the, like, I think one of your big offers is called main character energy. Are you
That's
still
actually like one of my intro my
okay?
intro. Yeah.
Well, tell me about it, because
Intro ones.
there's something about that like, some of it is like, I keep, I've heard more people kind of going that main character energy thing. So it can start to
Yeah.
feel a little like, I don't know, cutesy or something. But I think
Yeah.
really it's deeply feminist, right?
Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna go back briefly to branding. So like at the very beginning, I said I needed a strong brand. And so with that, I need a nice motif that'll carry me through for many, many years to come. And so what I came up with when I was scrolling through TikTok was this idea of like, it was a TikTok about a day in the life of a supporting B character. And I love that point of view because that's how I feel. I feel like I'm your supporting astrologer here because you are the main character, right? It's my job to get you connected to all the parties and all the fun things and like maybe the love of your life. It's my job to be connected and tapped in. It's your job to just live and know that I have your back, right? And so main character energy is honestly like the antithesis of like our constant, I don't know, our culture telling us that we need to center men through like the male gaze, like whether it's like the male gaze or like just like the fact that all institutions at one point were only men. No wonder there's this movement now of like in the dating world. Thank God you were married. I don't even. Anyway, like it is so rough out there, but like we all are like we need to decenter men, and it's so difficult to decenter men because that's what we're ingrained in. It's what we grew up in. We understand like it's what is it? The daughters have to take care of their aging parents. Why is it not put on the guy? Because the son is, married and has to deal with like his own family. And it's just like, okay, but the woman gets married too. Like she has her own family. What are you talking about? And so it's just this whole messed up, very fucked up system. And so becoming a main character in your life is really just like actually not like it's taking the driver's seat, for lack of a better metaphor. It's not letting life pass you by or not like allowing yourself to just be kind of rolled into the obligation of being a woman, like in all of your roles. Like I always think about Virginia Woolf and like what she talks about like a woman is always interrupted. So that right there is like that main character. Like what would a main character do? It'd be like I'm speaking.
And we all know that feeling, right? Of there's this thing that happens where you have your life up to a certain point, and then often it's when you get married or have kids, not always, where suddenly that life you had before goes away, and now you can feel it even more acutely how much you aren't the main character. But when you reflect back, you can even think like, was I ever really? Because of exactly what you said. Oldest daughters certainly know the energy of caring for younger siblings. I'm one of those, so we know that feeling. Sometimes it's caring for parents, but it's always this like prioritizing everyone else. And so prioritizing yourself is deeply feminist and very challenging. How does astrology help you do that?
Yeah, it helps you do that by just really getting to know yourself. Like it's the way I love to put it is that when you first look at your astrology chart, whether you're doing it like on an app or with an astrologer or yourself and your self study, is that it's the first time that you're seeing yourself the way the universe sees you, which is just a very like unbiased view. And I almost think it's incredibly, it's coming from a place of unconditional love, because it's like, here's a person that we've made that was born at these exact time, at this exact location, and there might be overlap with the other people around the world, right? But there's just certain nuances that are just going to be strictly unique to you. And so looking at that chart, you see like, oh, wow, there's so much information here. And then the more that you just think about yourself, the more that you step into main character energy. That's all it really takes. And it's not to be like, I mean, we're raised to say that like if we think about ourselves too much, then we're like navel gazing and we're self-centered and all that stuff. Well, like we're trying to decenter men so that we can self-center. So I don't think that being self-centered is bad. In fact, we should reclaim that term, because what else would I center? A man? A white man?
It's also not something that's hurled at men in the way it is at women. You know, and I grew up, Mom, if you're listening, I love you, but being told, you know, that I was selfish whenever I was centering myself. And I am of that same mind of like, let's take back or let's own selfish, because I am. I want to be, because I want to prioritize myself. I want to care about myself. And I think it often comes from people who haven't done that work yet and aren't able to center themselves. And because they can't, there's this like, even if they can't consciously aren't aware of this, there's this deep like longing to be able to do that thing. And because they can't, they have to project out and make that into a bad thing onto someone else to make themselves feel better about not being able to do it. So I think it's also important for us to remember that when that's coming at us, it's usually going back to what you said about those people, like it's immature Tauruses or what was it? Unhealed Tauruses.
Unhealed.
That unhealed piece is important. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the thing is like, the phrase I want to take back specifically is self-centered, because the compound word self-centered, that just makes sense for decentering men. You know, that's what we're going to do. And the other piece is that like, I mean, I know, Becky, like you're a member of a huge community. If you don't center yourself once in a while, you're going to burn out. And burnout, as many burnout coaches know, is like a systemic issue because it's ingrained in our work culture. And so once you're burned out, you're burned out. Like there's recovery, of course, right? But then it just takes so much time and effort to recover from that. And so if we just had a culture that was actually saying, no, it is good to self-center once in a while, or like I would do it more than quarterly. It should be like monthly, honestly. Then in that case, like you just have so much more to give. Like we all would have more resources to give if we were like, you know what? Nope, today's a self-centered day. We're going to do whatever Becky wants, whatever Babs wants, and we're going to like decompress and no one interrupt me. Virginia Woolf, like no one interrupt me. And that's what we do.
Well, and as you know, I take quarterly hotel weekends to myself.
Oh, you do?
I thought maybe you don't know that. I thought you did.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, I've talked about it here before, so people might be going like, we know. But I'll keep saying it until my face is blue, because I just think it's so important for people, especially those who are in relationships and parents, to get out and do something. Like I think if you're the only person in your domain, it might be easier physically to have that time. It's all mental though, because me being able to carve out that time is a giant mental battle, right? To get to the place of saying, I'm allowed to do this. And so once a quarter, I take 2 nights at a hotel just for me, whatever the fuck I want to do. And that gives me that energy I need to sustain myself. But I have gotten to a place where I'm like, I wish I could do this monthly. I don't think I'm there yet. But what you're inspiring me to think is I can still schedule, like what I'd like to get to is the place where I'm scheduling like a day off, like I'm only working 4 days a week. And then I have that 1 day a week that it may not be a whole weekend. It may not be a long, but during the day I get to say, if I just want to sleep today, I can. Or if I just want to read books today, I can. Because that stuff is so important. It brings me to the next thing I want to talk about perfectly, because it's about planning and our time and what actually brought me to you, like that made me, the first thing that made me think, I think I'm getting it, right? Was this idea of planning in a feminist way and using astrology to help you plan in this more feminist way. And to me, what that means by feminist is just in a way, again, like you said, that's self-centered planning based on what you as an individual need and that honors how you show up in the world. And so you help business owners plan their fiscal quarters according to the birth chart. I think you call it Plan It by the Planets. Plan It by the Planets.
Yeah.
Which I love. And so we even did a joint thing last year or beginning of this year, whenever it was, doing some of this work with people too. And because I do a lot of planning stuff, but I've never done it through this astrological lens. And it really opened my eyes about when my year actually starts, when I have these creative bursts, when I need to honor that need to chill the fuck out and avoid burnout. So tell people who are listening a little bit about that, because I think for the business owners here, this may be the thing that they're going to be the most like, especially if you're like me, where you're like, oh, am I really woo? Am I just woo adjacent? Am I just woo curious? Like, this might be your gateway drug. So tell people about it.
And so again, like, I'm all about the questions, right? We ask the one question and everything kind of reveals itself. And so the question that I know as a business owner that other business owners also ask is, why is it that no matter what I do, nothing pushes the needle? Like, I've tried everything and yet nothing's working. That's one question, right? Then there's another question. So that's a lot of stress, right? That's a very stressful situation. And then there's another stressful situation, which is like, why is it that everyone wants a piece of me? Like, why now? Why does everybody and their mom and their cousin all want, and their dogs want a piece of me? I don't understand. And so it's this like, it does so much to the body, right? The nervous system cannot handle that amount of like jerking around, essentially. And so when we look at the birth chart as a way to conduct time and in a way to like even format time, because like, what is time, as we've said earlier, but truly what it is it's what you make of it. And so when we look at like your birth chart, for example, it was like, okay, so somewhere in Scorpio season is like the beginning of your year. So it's probably the most like transition period. Like, you go from like nothing really going on. Maybe you're feeling like down in the dumps a little bit because you're dealing with 12th house stuff, which is all like your mental prisons and like your imposter syndrome that might seep in. Like, it's just, it's not like the best time. It's like a sweatpants eating popcorn in bed kind of time. And then it switches over to the first house, the ascendant degree. And that for you is like Scorpio season. And suddenly you're like, nope, I'm ready. You put on normal pants. You take a shower. You're ready to go. You want to get the show on the road. And that transition right there is like just a beautiful timing that happens every year that you can guarantee and you can count on. And so as you move through the quarters, what happens is that your chart, because it's a 360-degree circle, it breaks down, not always evenly. It depends on the chart, of course, but it does break it down into 4 specific quarters. And so year over year, you generally have the same themes going on around the same time. There are certain planets, for example, that might go retrograde during some years and not others. But eventually what happens is that you get the rhythm of it and you understand, okay, quarter 3, for example, might be my busiest. I need to make sure that I have plenty of support that I can delegate tasks to so that I don't get burned out, right? Meanwhile, maybe your following quarter 4 is empty. So you know that you can take a vacation. I like to introduce this to people, especially if they have large families or if they're like, married to another entrepreneur, for example. Being able to align and overlap the schedules is really important, especially if like you're trying to figure out the best time to go on vacation. And one of you is always getting bothered and pinged, and the other is just like, why aren't you present? And it's just like, I can't be present because I'm bothered and pinged. But if you line up your schedules, it creates like this time hack where everything really does align well, and you can plan for it year over year to the point where you don't even need me, which is honestly like my MO. I don't want you to need me. You just need to know the tools, and then you can figure it out from there.
Again, it's just this window into saying, I see you. For me to say it to myself, I see you, Becky. Yeah. And like, here's how you're wired. Every year around, October, even late September, you start getting real freaking excited about the year ahead. You're done with the year you're in, and you're like ready for next year. And I never really understood why everyone else wasn't feeling the same way, right? And why everyone cared about this like arbitrary January thing, because by then I'm already well into my new year. I've started. Yeah. I was planning back in September. I was implementing in October. By November, I'm fully into the year. Come January, I'm like, I'm feeling almost halfway through my year. What's wrong with everyone? Like, catch up,
exactly.
people. And so it's this understanding of that then also helps me if you take that knowledge that I see you and then say, now, how do I use that to my advantage?
Yeah.
And again, whatever tool gets you there is great. And if astrology can be that tool, then awesome. I think the big thing that I want people to take from this, and I think you probably do too, is find the tool that works for you and then allow yourself to use that to honor yourself and your needs. It's so important. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're writing a book.
I am.
How does that tie into all of this? Is it related to a specific piece of this, all of this, your journey? I want to hear about it.
It is actually a book that will help people discover how they can participate in activism through their astrological chart and their placements. So it takes on a little bit of pop astrology just because, we live in a capitalistic world, so I have to kind of play by their rules. So basically I take on the history of astrology and I go into that whole piece about, originally it was men who really loved astrology and now it's women, and that descent, right? And so I go into that, and then I also go into this understanding of like all the different celebrity, I guess like celebrity is a weird term for it, but like all the famous activists that we know of and breaking down their chart to show you how this expresses itself so that you get inspired. So like Dolly Parton, for example, is a Capricorn. And so she's the archetype of the mastermind because she really does pool her money in various causes and organizations that actually have a profound impact on so much. So like the one that I think is the most famous is like the Free Library, right? The Free Library. And so like, she's fostering a love of reading at a young age for people who otherwise can't afford the books, which is, I think, phenomenal. But it's also like that is such a large impact for something. So it's like such a mastermind move,
Just as I'm thinking about what you're saying here, that's the thing that this gives you is that understanding of how do you, instead of fighting against how you're wired, if you get this understanding, then it's like you can, it becomes your superpowers. How do you use this information to then use it as a superpower? Because I think women do this so often. We discount the things that come easy and natural to us as being not valuable, right? Not charging that premium price, not saying I'm allowed to do it. Like we are so instructed in this world that everything has to be hard to be valuable, right? Yeah. Like you have to work hard. If it's not hard, if you didn't sweat, blood, tears, all of that, then it wasn't worthy. If it's just something that you're just naturally good at, you're not allowed to charge for it. And so like, I'm sure for Dolly, because she's naturally wired that way, it was logical. It was simple. It was easy. And then it has the greatest impact.
It does.
So I love that understanding of how you can use these things to then not just benefit yourself, which is great. We want to center ourselves, but then also how do you turn that into the activism that makes the most sense for you?
Exactly. And then on top of that, we're like, this book is really here to challenge activism on a whole as well, because so much of the activism that we know about is like the ones that are not necessarily accessible to many of us. So like, I personally don't feel comfortable going to a crowd of people with the chance that I might get tear gassed and then I have to like, waterboard myself with milk or milk board myself or like have like a getaway driver. Like I don't like, that's too chaotic for me. I don't want to do that. But I found out through this, through researching for this book that there's so many quiet ways to participate in activism that doesn't get shown because it's not showy. It's not the rah we're in the streets, doing the march, right? But it is quiet, like writing to your representative or calling nonstop or all that. Like that is part of activism. And so I wanted to shine a light on all the ways in which we can do activism. And actually, like one of my favorite chapters to write about is the archetype for Cancer. So Cancer is like the safety monitor. And it's so important to have a safety monitor in your group when you're doing activism, because that's the person that's going to make sure that you are not burning out. It's the person that's going to make sure you have the boundaries. It's the person that'll make sure that you get enough sleep, that you, like even calling it like a nap captain, just like making sure like, did you sleep? Did you eat? Are you regular? Like what's happening? Like, why are you agitated? And then it's like, oh, okay. Maybe you should like step back for a little bit. You're doing the fight, but like, we can rest, right? We're allowed to rest.
That's the Jordan Meanies of the world for people who listen to this podcast back in season 1, because she's immediately who I think of. She's been checking on me lately because I'm doing a little too much lately. And she's been doing that, like, just, are you resting and are you okay? And how are you caring for yourself? And that,
Exactly.
I mean, that's just as important as the person who's out on the front line getting tear gas. All of it's important.
Exactly.
And it makes me think of, and I don't know if you know this, this model, but because I only recently learned of it from Taina Brown, but it's called the Social Change Map from Deepa Iyer. If you don't, you should check it out, because her whole thing is that there's all these different, and it's exactly what you're describing. Activism is not just, doesn't look just one way. And there's all these different places that come in. She talks about the storytellers, the guides, the visionaries, the healers are who you're talking about, the caregivers, the disruptors, the builders. There's all these different models. So I'll link to that because I think people would love to check it out.
Perfect.
And I think understanding, using your book in combination with what she's got will help you. It's like that mapping out of how do you show up.
And then, of course, like the number one goal is that we just don't burn out, because that was the issue with the previous waves of feminism. Unfortunately, a lot of other life happened. Like, I think fourth wave was just beginning, and then bam, we had a pandemic, and then that stifled all momentum, and now we're like in a weird limbo. And, depending on how the election goes, we don't know, but it'll go one way or an extreme other way. And either way, the stars are aligning that we're ending patriarchy in our lifetimes. Yes.
I would love to live long enough to feel that sense of moment, like a complete shift in that. I don't know that I will, but I want to see it for my child and for his children. And I want to see this future where we live in a space where it is finally.
Well, done. I can tell you like a long-term transit from here. So like I'm trying to align my book with the Chiron entering Aries. So Chiron is that wounded healer that we talk about, which is why I keep saying like the unhealed Taurus, the unhealed, that's the key word. So when Chiron goes into Aries, it's going to be the moment when society has to do an audit on toxic masculinity, because Aries is the first of the zodiac sign. So it's the leader, but it's also ruled by Mars, which is masculine energy. And so if we're doing an audit of like basically how toxic masculinity hurts men, because of that Chiron wounding, I would say that like 2026, which is when I would like my book to be out there and accessible to all, that's when we'll see the beginnings of that. And then it'll be a slow burn throughout, like all the way until like 10 years later, like 2038 or something like that.
Okay. I'll be back to see you in 2026.
Yes.
Ready to say, I'm cashing this check if it hasn't happened. I want to see.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
See.
All right. Well, let's wind things up. We're going to do a bonus conversation just for anyone who wants to know about Mercury retrograde. Perfect. Because it didn't really fit into this conversation, but it's like, I think it's the thing that comes up so often when I'm in business communities. I think the most common astrological related thing I hear is Mercury in retrograde? Oh, people say it all the time, but I think a lot of people don't really understand what it means or like how it actually affects us. So we'll do a little short talk about that because I think that could be interesting.
Perfect.
So if you want to hear that, then make sure you subscribe to the Feminist Founders newsletter because that's where that will exist. And let's wrap up by having you share a resource that has been valuable to you.
Yeah. So during my just like looking up all the different feminist books and writing my sample chapters and things like that, the book that I love returning to is called Girly Drinks, and it's by, I think, something O'Mallory. Forgot her first name.
It's Mallory O'Meara. I've never heard of this, so that's very exciting, and I will link to it in show notes, but tell us about it.
It's so good. So it is the history of drinking, but specifically making alcohol, and it turns out that women created alcohol.
Oh my God, now I have to read this. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is certainly not the world in which we live right now.
My favorite takeaway is so this is what I do forever. Whenever I cheers to ending patriarchy. And then I also say, fuck Hammurabi. So it's like a double, because I learned from this book that when the Hammurabi codes were created, that's the beginning of patriarchy. It was tied up to drinking too. So it's women weren't allowed to drink, even though they're the ones who made the drinks.
Okay. And then the last thing is, what's an organization doing good work in the world that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, I would like to highlight the Psychedelic Sisterhood. So they educate a lot of people on, specifically women with an X, on harm reduction for specific psychedelics, and also just making sure that everyone is safe and doing the right protocols, but also making psychedelics a lot less taboo to talk about, because as legislation is working towards legalizing psilocybin, especially in some states, and it'll catch on because marijuana was, legalized just a couple of years ago. And so psilocybin's not too far behind. But also they also do wonderful sponsored events for like ketamine therapy. So that's like with a clinician and things like that. And just like different ways to work with psychedelics in a therapeutic state so that you can work through trauma and be completely detached from it while also, going through what you need to do.
I gotta say, I love the fact that I have been asking about this. This is, I don't know, season 3. I'm probably nearing 100 episodes, and I don't think there's been a repeat of an organization yet, which is amazing. It just tells you there are so many great organizations doing good work in the world, and I love it. I'm going to make a donation to say thank you for your time today, and I would love for other people who are listening to do the same. I will link to it in the show notes. And thank you, Babs. We're going to go have our bonus conversation. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter to get that, to hear about Mercury in retrograde. Who knows? Maybe this will air when Mercury's in retrograde. So it'll be really important. And thank you for your time, Babs.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Founders podcast. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, or if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing with the show, please visit feministfounderspodcast.com. There you can find out about becoming a paid subscriber for as little as the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, which will directly support my work. Thanks again, and I can't wait for our next episode.